Our first presenter is from Endpoint Clinical. Joining us is Jeff Rubesin. He is the Vice President of Product Strategy. Welcome, Jeff.
All right, Perry, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. I'm honored to kickstart us with this webinar as we really look at what Endpoint does here for the industry and also these other vendors on the call. So I appreciate that kickoff. So today, we're going to talk about our fifth generation technology platform, Elosity, and more importantly, Endpoint as a business, and how we operate to support our customers. So here today, we're going to talk a little bit about Endpoint, and then really we're going to frame up our technology with respect to some challenges that we've seen within the industry, really surrounding friction within RTSM, right? So, where friction appears, how friction impacts our customers and our sites, and ultimately how our technology is set up to really eliminate friction and ultimately support our customers and their sites. So starting off, just to frame it up, a little bit here about Endpoint. So Endpoint has been around since 2010. We've been operating in the RTSM space for 16 years, servicing over 1 million patients to date, really driving therapeutics, for the industry. We have gone ahead and serviced about 2,250 clinical trials of all different unique designs. We've serviced over 300 different sponsors, driving high quality with respect to, supporting over 350 different regulatory inspections and audits for our customers. We are a best-in-breed RTSM provider, exclusively focused in RTSM or IRT. That's what we do, both from our technology delivery, our product investment, and also our operational footprint with our support services and our project management teams. We have a deep operational and global footprint. Our trials have operated in over 90 different countries, and we have a 24/7, global operations across the US, EMEA, and APAC. And one of the most exciting things for me individually, being the head of product here at Endpoint, is that recently we were recognized by Everest Group as one of the top providers with our new technology in the space, right? So very exciting, and excited to talk to you here today about it a little bit more. So with respect to how I'm framing up this, this discussion, as well as the product features that really help support our customers, I want to pose this as a challenge, right? One of the big things that we see as a vendor is really, it's not about initial trial delivery, right? That's become table stakes within this industry. When you're talking about go lives in 16 weeks, go lives in 8 weeks, go lives in 1 week, 2 days, really that's not the challenge that we're looking to address here at Endpoint. Now, while we can go live in a very rapid pace, really the big problem in this industry is what happens after that trial goes live. So here's some basic stats surrounding protocol amendments within our industry, really showing that, clinical trial operations, as well as the technology that fuels the operations, experiences a lot of change throughout the entire, life cycle of that clinical trial. 76% of trials these days hit a protocol amendment, and these amendments are very expensive. That number there is not the cost of an RTSM amendment, but the overall cost of what amendments are for, our customers in totality. When we look at some of the friction that is driven by this post-go live process, really there's a couple different vectors of operational friction that happen for the initial trial delivery, but also for the ongoing support. So, when we are delivering our product roadmap, we typically focus on 3 major areas, data, supply, and process and change, right? So what type of friction results, from the operational post-go live process when it comes to data, right? As these trials amend, you're changing visit schedules, you're changing kit types, you're changing, clinical systems that you're working with, which can tend to lead to fragmented data, ultimately leading to a lot of costs when it comes to data reconciliation and data management for trials. Clinical supply, right? A lot of challenge with complex supply chain in this industry. complex distribution networks, multi-tier distribution across multiple geographies, a lot of complex challenges, not just from the technology and the RTSM, but also from the processes when you look across CMOs, when you look across sponsors, really a lot of different geographic challenges. And then ultimately process and change, right? How do you continue to maintain good practice while these systems are changing, while your trials changing, while you have to maintain compliance on all this, adaptation that's happening in the industry? So all that friction really goes ahead and it impacts different departments differently throughout the business. And this isn't just our customers, but also our internal teams as well, right? Friction within the supply chain, as far as driving cost, having overage, how do we deal with that throughout our process with our technology to really support that adaptation in the clinical supply chain? When it comes to clinical operations, managing that friction with onboarding new sites, rapid enrollment, onboarding different geographies, training and managing all these end users. When it comes to data and IT, it's not just about RTSM, right? It's about your connected ecosystem. How are you managing friction and change as new vendors come in the industry? As different systems evolve, as you're changing RTSM providers, continuously, right? How do we help manage that process? And then ultimately, the CROs and the vendors, right? How do we manage friction as a business to best support our customers and help, all the multiple parties that are involved within the delivery of RTSM? So when we built Elosity, we looked at really that challenge statement, and we looked across multiple pillars that really help reduce friction for our customers. So first and foremost, implementing RTSM with a modern architecture for continuous advancement, right? We wanted to make sure that as we develop and we evolve our product, we don't leave our customers behind. So the way our product is architected really allows us to continuously evolve our software, implement new features and functionality, and continue to, modernize and deliver with RTSM without impacting the validated state of your clinical trial. A seamless user experience, right? So a lot of people get user interface and user experience mixed up, but really it's both, right? We develop beautiful products that really are geared towards each user of the system. Advanced workflows, depending on if you're a site user, if you're a CRO user, if you're a monitor, if you're a sponsor, if you're an internal employee, we make sure that the experience is tailored to you. And really that helps, reduce training overhead. It delivers a positive experience for our sites and ultimately results in better data quality for your clinical trial. Our integration marketplace, so this is a nice one, really ensuring that we can connect to any third-party system on the market, right? And this isn't just, a pre-built connector. It's a whole, product offering that allows us to seamlessly connect to different third-party systems and really configure and tailor each integration, whether it's a complex EDC integration, CTMS integrations, depot integrations across any system to really allow our sponsors to have flexibility while they're planning out their technology footprint. A connected data lake, right? So this is a nice offering, right? All of our information, lives at the sponsor level, right? It can be flexible per study, but really all of the data flows into a personalized data lake that allows you to get access to any information. And this isn't just traditional reports. It's any piece of data or metadata that really is captured by your RTSM systems can be made available to you or transferred to you in order for you to take that information internally and utilize it with, to make decisions. Deep cross-protocol supply. That says cross-sponsor. That's not the case. It's cross-protocol. Ultimately, really, we understand that clinical trial supply management really thinks at a program level, right? So while we're operating all these individual studies, you have visibility and management capabilities across your entire clinical trial, portfolio, whether it's shared depots, shared kit types, pooled inventory across your different sites, really allowing you flexibility with that ultimately leads towards, ensuring our sites are fully supplied and stocked on time, but really reduces waste within, your trial delivery. And then continuous study evolution. So ultimately, how do we allow for flexibility with the initial study design, but also as the trial, undergoes change, as we know it will, how do we support that continuous adaptation of your study without impacting our customers? So when we look at that, we really split that into a few areas. So when we're talking about our data, really we look again at that sponsor-specific data lake, right? You having access to your information. Endpoint is a sub-processor of data. You guys are the owners. So ultimately, we want to make sure that that information is readily accessible to you so you can make your decisions. Talk with your data with Elo AI. So this is a nice feature that we just released, which really allows you to have conversational interaction with your RTSM data to make decisions in a secure, blind controlled fashion, utilizing NLP to ask questions of your information and get quick answers, allowing you to take action. Delta sharing. So really that goes back to that data access, right? Imagine a world where you had access to your study databases at any time, allowing you to drive your own insights, analytics, and data management on that information. AI dashboards, right? So taking a similar data model that fuels our chat with data, we offer pre-canned dashboards with, that are AI infused that ultimately give you visibility that's tailored to your role. Historical data tracking, right? Not just looking at the current information within the RTSM, but being able to look at your study as it's evolved over time, taking point-in-time snapshots and really evaluating the information that has happened over the longevity of your trial. Self-service data transfers, right? So really enabling you access again to your information, being able to tailor how you want your data to look, where it's transmitted to, and how often it's being transmitted. And then again, human readable audit logs, right? So again, this is becoming table stakes within the industry, but really audit tracking and then taking that in a consumable fashion, utilizing AI on top of that to really provide deep insights and answer questions that come up during regulatory inspections. When it comes to the supply chain, looking at that drug pooling that we've talked about a little earlier, handling complex distribution networks with central pharmacies, sourcing strategies, multi-tier manufacturing at local depots, ensuring that we can handle, complex geography when it comes to the supply chain. Direct-to-patient capabilities, really enabling hybrid trial designs, ensuring that regardless of how you want to operate your trial, we can ensure that medication gets directly to the patient wherever they're located. Complex depot and distribution setup, obviously, we talked about that a little earlier. I'm getting the 3-minute warning, so I want to make sure I get through the rest of this. Ensuring that we can support your supply chain. AI-enabled supply insights and projection, right? So whether you want to operate in a traditional RTSM supply chain, with your just standard algorithms, or if you want the opportunity to try out, leveraging AI for prediction, all flexible and configurable within the platform. And then ultimately, cradle to grave drug tracking and audit tracking, from that initial manufacturing process all the way through the returns destruction, whether it's a DTP setup or any other configuration, really having visibility into your entire, inventory. And lastly, ensuring that we handle process and change effectively. Right, so being able to configure and adapt your clinical trial design through our self-service study designer, whether it's Endpoint driving the service operation on your trial, or whether it's yourself building and configuring your own clinical trials, it's all managed within the platform. AI-powered design assistant. So with that, we make sure that we have training, help management, as well as different technology layered throughout the user experience that really helps guide our teams, our customers, and our internal teams with the design process. Requirements generation and automated risk assessment, ultimately really ensuring that we can get value to our customers as soon as we can in the process. So really starting to build studies at the point of kickoff, allowing us to ultimately get to market faster. An inbuilt SDLC, so it's not just we built a RTSM system, we built an entire delivery platform really dedicated to delivering and amending clinical trials. And ultimately, agentic code extensibility, right? So while our system is fully configurable, you can also program against it, leveraging AI in order to really, be able to streamline and really meet complex business requirements when it comes to things like adaptive randomization, complex titration, and dispensation management. So, today we really talked a little bit about endpoint. We talked about our technology offering, and we really want to help you reduce friction and run better trials. So thank you again. And I'm Jeff Rubesin, representing Endpoint Clinical.
Thank you, Jeff. Really love your presentation. The post-go live nature of everything you're talking about, so important. So here's a post-go live question. I'm mid-trial and I've got protocol changes. How quickly can you and the technology adopt those changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, at the end of the day, whether we do it, if it's as a service in which Endpoint is configuring the amendment, or if you want to do it as a customer, making change within the RTSM is fairly trivial from a configuration perspective. Obviously, if we're performing the change, we still have to take our configuration through a GXP compliant process. So we make sure that all of it, it's all validated and documented. If you're doing it in a self-service process, that's obviously beholden to you. But, change can be instant depending on if it's a simple change, managing supply strategies, changing your depot networks, adding countries, adding kit types. It can be instant within the platform. Some change, if you're changing an entire trial workflow, adding a crossover arm, some of the more complex change, you're looking at, from a configuration perspective, a matter of a day or a few hours, but ultimately the time is really dependent based on us continuing to validate, test, deploy, and user accept the software. So we still make sure that we have robust process. Even if the time to that delivery is fast, we make sure that we thoroughly ensure quality within the process.
Well, excellent. Great presentation, Jeff. And maybe next time we can hear more about the talk to your data feature. That sounds very interesting. So thank you for being with us today, Jeff Rubesin from Endpoint Clinical.
All right. Thank you, Perry. Appreciate it.